Hey everybody, welcome to the Nature Journal Club. Today is watercolor pencils. Watercolor pencils are a really interesting nature journaling and sketching tool. When I first encountered them, I thought, oh, like this is the answer. This is brilliant, and I started like, I love these things. And then they started doing weird things to me. And I would get these really unexpected results, and I got to the point where hey, watercolor pencils, you can't use these things. And I was recommending people like just ignore the watercolor pencils. And then what I realized is that the reason why I was having so much difficulty with them is because I wanted them to behave like watercolors. Well, it turns out they're watercolor pencils. So they don't behave like watercolors. They do their own thing in their own way. And once you kind of know their kind of idiosyncrasies and little tricks, they start to work in ways that are really predictable and really useful, and they're great to use. So what I'm going to be doing is showing you an approach that I found that is very successful for getting cool effects with watercolor pencils. We're going to be following along on the worksheet that all of you have. If you are watching this at home, there will be a link below where you can get a copy, where you can print out a copy of the worksheet that we're all using, so you can do this too. And it's going to be really helpful to not just watch or listen to this, but actually do it as we're talking. So if you are working on your lap, I'm going to suggest that you get a notebook or a sketchbook or something underneath your journal, or journal underneath the paper that I've handed out, so that you can press a little bit more forcefully with your watercolor pencils. And you're going to find that that's going to help you be able to, there's some books over there if you need to get a different book underneath what you're doing. Watercolor pencils, they've got some surprises for you when you first start working them. The way that they kind of fundamentally work is really intuitive. They start off like a pencil, and then you add water. So you take, just like you would with a normal colored pencil, you draw stuff in with your pencil, and a major trick for getting any kind of colored pencil to work is you start layering different pencil colors on top. You can build up lots of interesting colors with colored pencils. But these are water soluble, so then when you hit it with a brush, you get this sort of a thing. And it has this watercolor effect, and all these little spaces get filled in, and you can get smooth areas of color. You can still kind of get gradations, but there are so that's terrific. It's really useful. However, when you do this, any detail that you put in just got washed out, just got smeared over. And there are a couple other big surprises that watercolor pencils can have for you. So for instance, if I start off with a block like this, sometimes as I wet it and I start to paint with it, all the pigment starts to migrate with my brush, and I get something like this. Or I've taken all the pigment that's here and mished it over I've got smooth in here, but look at that. There's all my paint or the pigment from the pencil now kind of in a little edge. Has anybody ever gotten that effect with your watercolor pencils? It can be pretty frustrating. When this happens, and it will probably happen today as you're doing these little demos, what I do is, while this paper is still damp, I take my brush, don't clean the brush off, but I come into these little dark areas, and you can kind of then use that like it's an area of paint, get that on your brush, and bring it back out into this area. You can repopulate this space with that same paint. So I've taken this little crust and then got my brush down in there, and then kind of gone back into here and pulled that back up to fill that space. So if that happens to you, and expect it to happen, that's kind of what your approach is going to be. Yeah. Well, you can find a seat right back there. We've already got a worksheet for you on the chair. Oh, she's sitting right back there. So that's kind of surprise number one. Surprise number two that watercolor pencils have in store for you is that you'll put your colors out here, and you'd expect it to be this same color when it gets wet. With some pencils, it will be. But, and you see the big but there, not with all of them. So for a lot of colored pencils, the hue, the color that you had, it goes from being like a normal kind of spring green to like a bright, loud, screaming chartreuse, or the sort of darker blue to an intense, vivid cyan. And so there'll be a hue shift, and also there is often going to be a shift in the value when it gets wet. So here I've just taken the little squiggles of color and hit the bottom of those. You'll notice that some travel more. But let's just zoom in over on this part. Notice that this one here did a big value shift. It was lighter here, darker here. Right? This one does a hue shift. This is much yellower than this. So I just was doing a picture of chestnut-back chickadees, and I used some of this color in their wings and got it wet, and all of a sudden I have these chickadees with yellow wings. And I think, oh yeah, that pencil, that's what it does. Some get lighter, some get darker when you add the water on. So what I am going to suggest that you do is you can turn your piece of paper over and just start to make a few little, start with your one end of your palette spectrum, and you're going to make a series of vertical or horizontal bars. And I think life size about this big is good, about that big. And what you're going to do then is on half of it, you're going to hit that with water and blend it out. That way you'll be able to see the color pre-wetted and post-wetted. So I would then get my water and kind of come out like this on it, and then I will have, for this pencil in my palette, on the kind of paper that I use in my journal, this is the way that it behaves. So start doing that on your journal, and you can just make a series of little globs. While you're doing that, I'm going to be also talking to you about types of pencils that you can get. Not all pencils are the same, right? So not all pencils are going to really work very well. Some of the pencils have a lot of binder in them. So binder is the stuff that holds the fabric of a pencil together. Some pencil brands have tons of binder and very, very little pigment. And some brands of pencils, the pigment that they have is not very soluble. So, and some brands, the color changes are dramatic and bold. But, so ones that I recommend that people get a hold of. A more expensive line are the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer pencils. Those work really, really well. I recently have discovered a really effective low-cost alternative. General's Pencils makes these sets of watercolor pencils, and they're about half the cost. And so those are also really, really good. But there are brands of watercolor pencils out there, you know, you can't really get any pigment out of them. So those are a couple of brands that I suggest. If people are sort of watching this in a video, if you've got other brands that you personally have tested and you really like, just leave a note in the comments. So start just doing some of these experiments, kind of work those on your paper, and we're going to do this for a couple of minutes. We're not going to give you time to do all the pencils in your palette right now, but just sort of experiment with a few, see if you can find a couple that also are starting to do either a value shift, so you can see that happen, or a hue shift where it changed to another color. Just take your time and we'll do that right now. I'm going to let you folks continue doing those exercises at home, but this is a very important thing to do. You're starting to get just a feeling for what are the behaviors of your individual pencils? Which ones darken, which ones lighten, which ones color shift, which ones behave the way that's predictable. You probably are not, you don't have to memorize it all, just the ones that are real outliers, like, ooh, that's a darkener, or that's a huge color shift in that one. Very often a lot of the greens, a lot of the blues will also, they'll be like, it went from sort of a deeper shade of blue to all of a sudden a really bright, vivid thing. Purples will do the same thing. You just want to know with your set how they behave. And what we're going to do is a little exercise with one of those pencils. Right now we're going to do what's called a monochromatic study. So we're not going to worry about color matching. We're just going to use one dark pencil. Maybe you can just grab a black pencil and you can follow along, and we're going to do a watercolor pencil drawing with this pencil. And it's going to be on your worksheet. There's a little shape like this. This is a view down Yosemite Valley, El Capitan on the left here. And what we're going to do is turn this into a small value study of the landscape there. So the watercolor pencils are great for quick value studies. Very often when I'm doing a landscape drawing, instead of drawing a frame in first and then putting my drawing inside of it, I will get my drawing basically blocked out, and then I will draw a frame around that. This gives you a lot more control over the boundaries and edges of your drawing. If you draw the frame first, what's going to happen is you'll be over here and you're like, oh, I just want to draw that little thing that's a little bit further past. And you can't do that because you've got that frame in there. And so you have to maybe squish the landscape so that element gets in there, or cut it out entirely. So if you first block things in, then put your frame around it, it's a lot easier. This also allows me to think about things such as, if I had brought the sky down lower, then this area here would be close in size to this. It wouldn't be as interesting a composition, so you can be thinking about, oh, I want a little bit more sky. It's a little bit easier if you first get your landscape blocked out, then drop your frame in around it. Now what I'm going to do is, with that dark pencil, just that one dark pencil, I am going to block in 3 areas of value. So I've got dark, I've got medium, and light. And in this, let's take a look in the dark. In the dark here, I'm making really bold scrubs, pressing harder, they're thicker lines. A bunch of these lines will probably show through in the final thing. And that will actually be good for me because I'm making them vertical. It'll suggest trees and those vertical structure of the trees. Up here in the sky, I don't want that texture to come through. And I'm going to use a really, really light value there. A strategy that I'll often do if I'm putting in, say, a cloud, is I will lightly draw the edge of the cloud, but I have to do it with a very, very light hand, and then I can fill in all this with lines lightly that are the same value as that little line, and then I don't get kind of a hard edge to my clouds. But you can draw in where your cloud is. Also notice, this is intentional, I'm leaving a little zone here at the top edge of El Capitan that's going to be white. This is going to end up being a dark sky, a darker sky. This will be darker. And I want to get, if this is also dark, then the edge of El Capitan won't pop as well. A general strategy that people do in drawings is you'll see they'll put light against dark and dark against light. So here I'm going to keep this light so it'll show up against a slightly darker sky. Light against dark, dark against light. The opposite of that is going to be down in here. This little hill here, I'm going to be taking water in a moment and blending it up this way. So this will end up being a darker ridge against a lighter sky. So on your little page, give yourself a frame, block in those values. I'm intentionally letting some of these vertical strokes show up here to suggest the verticality of the big granite monoliths. It's okay in the sky. If you want, you can use more the side of the pencil. And then it's less likely for those little lines to show up. If I draw really hard in there, then those lines really, they pop out, and it's harder then to later blend them together. I've already tested my black, and I know that my black does a dark shift, so I'm expecting that sky to end up being a little bit darker. Now, here's the big moment. You get out your water brush and start blending these areas. I make a slight scrubbing motion in here, and it's going to pick up all of this. I want to blend that. I'm going to start in my lighter areas in here. I want the sky to be smooth, but here in this rock face, I'm going to be a little bit more rough with it. I want a little bit of texture to come in. So I'm not going to be like blending this to be a smooth blending this. Sky smooth, a little bit of texture. Really big, you can see that dark shift, right? Pops those clouds. Putting a little bit of water in here, so some of those pencil lines are still telling my story. And here I brought this up to that edge. I've got a darker mountain against a lighter cloud. And then the really fun part is you get water into these foreground trees because you gave it a little bit more pencil graphite pigment in there. Bam, it pops out. Also here I'm leaving this a little bit rough as well. So here, this is using watercolor pencils the way that I was originally kind of introduced to them. And it's intuitive, you draw your stuff and then you add the water in. And then I would go like, and I'm done. But sometimes this approach, it messes with your details, and when you get value shifts in it, that can be really frustrating. So this is a great example for, I need a quick little value study. I put up, got some pencil strokes down, put some water on it, and you're on hiking down the trail. So this whole landscape here you can do in about 5 minutes. Let's say you want to, though, get more detail and more of a sort of vibrant picture with your colored pencils. We're going to do that now. Before we do, I want to point out that this picture right now, just when you squint at it, this is about the same value as this stuff. It's not as interesting a picture as this. What made this get better is this being a darker value down here. So having a greater value range in your pictures is great. On this next one, you see that little circle on your page? We're going to be playing with that to get some really saturated darks. And we're going to start just with our pencils. So what I'm doing here is I've drawn myself a little orange ball, and I'm layering colored pencil into that ball. In this case, leaving a little bit of a paler spot up in here. When you're layering pencils, one trick that's very effective is with each layer to slightly change, and by the way, this is all on dry paper, slightly change the direction of your pencil strokes. So if I start kind of shading like this, the next time I'm adding in a layer, I'll come in and add that one from this direction, and then the next one from this direction. When you slightly change the angle of the strokes that you're putting in, your paper is going to be able to hold more pigment. The paper that I've given out to all of you, unfortunately, is really smooth. It doesn't have a lot of tooth. It makes it difficult to kind of get your pencil to grip on it. But we'll just sort of make do with what we can. But on this, what I'm going to challenge you is to not go anemic. Try to push for a more vivid color And for this background here, this is a black that I made by taking several different colors and overlapping them. So if you look through your palette, there's a really dark green, there's a dark blue, there's a dark purpley red. Take some of those dark colors and really kind of lean into it a little bit more to get that color on the page. Earlier we're being kind of, light, but here we want to push this to a dark value. And if you're doing a tiny little area, using your black pencil is great. But if you're doing a larger area, you want kind of a sparkle back of all these other little colors in there. So build up a black by overlaying several different colors. With this area here, rather than have a hard white spot, kind of circle out and just take a yellow and kind of press harder here and circle in, getting lighter, getting lighter, getting lighter. I'm going to build up that rich color. On your page, see if you can get also that kind of an intense black. It's not just your black pencil. Take some of your other pencils with dark values, start to layer them. This trick is also gold for when you're not using, when you're using regular colored pencils. The idea, the more different pencils that are brought into any one color on your page, the more visually interesting that's going to be. It's going to make that part of your page a lot more successful. On these ones, on that background area, push that background even more with your pencil.
On this one?
No, on this stuff back here.
Oh,
Right? Be willing just to kind of go like, kind of get primeval on that, right? Just like, okay. All right, push that a little bit more. I want to pull out that value. This, I'm trying to get a place where, that, there we go. The, and then do the same with another color. So we're getting a heavy dose of pigment out there. It's okay to throw some black into that, but I think it's a great experiment to see like what happens if I just take all these other colors and just push them in there. You start off with something green and you say like, oh, I can't have that just be all green. And then you get some red, brown in there, this purpley color, some blue. The minute you pile all those things on, it turns black for you. Then what we're going to do is hit this with water. First we're going to hit this sphere in the center. And I might suggest you start your brush right in here, kind of swirling your brush around a few times in here, and then start kind of coming out and around. If, as you do that, it starts to do that thing where it picks up pigment and moves it off, then once you get over the whole thing, you'll have, let's say there's a wad of darker stuff in here, you pick that up, you can bring that into some of the areas that are a little bit more pale, and you're going to do the same with the black in the background. Because you gave it a bunch of color here, you can get really dense darks. But do expect that as you're painting this, there'll be places where it starts to get pale because you're moving that off. And just take some of that pigment that you've moved, tap it back into that little area while it's all still wet. At some point you might accidentally slurp over a side of your sphere. You can fix that then by making the whole thing smaller. But then you have to do a lot of trimming of your sphere. what I like to do is I'll start out here in the black, and then I get that black on the tip of my water brush, and then I'll kind of just come around here and just sort of tickle the tip of this with that end of the brush, so that out here I can be just but then I'll take the tip of it and just glide it along the edge there, and that way I can get that very crisp edge with watercolor pencils. If you like what you got, you're in good shape. If you don't like what you got, you're still going to be in good shape. Because on this one, we're going to do something slightly different. Sometimes you put down your water and you go like, thank you, that's just what I wanted. But very often, it's going to do a color shift, something weird's going to happen, you'll be like, right? While the paper is still wet, we're not going to do anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to ignore this for now, and we'll come back to it later after it's dried a little bit. And we'll tweak it a little bit more, and do some fun stuff. While this is drying, we are going to play with the iris. Not the iris of your eye, the one that's down on the corner of your worksheet. Before we do that though, let's just, in those little squares that you'll see up on the other side of the worksheet, let's just test a few little blobs of purple or blue. Take some of your blue pencils, layer them over each other, and just test to see which colors you like, and which ones look good in combination. If you've got a magenta, put some magenta in with some cyan, with some blue. If you've got some purples, just mix another blue in with that, and see which ones you really like. And you go like, oh, it's not as lovely and bright when I get that sort of dark, blue jean color in it. So maybe put that one to the sides. Which ones are making kind of vibrant purples and blues that you like? Just do a little bit of experimenting. Several colors layered, add some water to it, and see what it does. We're just going to take a moment for everybody to have a chance to do that. So what I'm going to do with that iris, in future classes, it'll be all about drawing curling petals and foreshortened elements and these sorts of things. We're not worried about that for now. Today's class is just about applying these pencils. So I've put a grayscale version of this onto your page. And what I'd like you to do is to trace over the flower petal parts with some medium shade of purple or blue. No water, just a medium shade of purple or blue. On the leaves, a little bit of green, darker green. Trace over those edges with green. And on the ovary and the little stem here of the iris, let's do a little bit of lighter green in there. So if I were drawing this out in the field, one way I might, if I use, say, a black pencil, and then I have that wrapped around my iris will have a hard black edge. But if I do that with one of the colors that I'm going to be using in that iris flower, then I don't have that problem. So you can, if you want to have a purple petal, you can do your actual drawing of it with that purple pencil. And once you've got that blocked in, you can then start to fill in these areas with purple or green. Let me show you one thing I'm going to do on this sepal right here, this structure right here that flops out towards you. This is a sepal. It's going to have an area of white on it that is roughly shaped like a key, kind of down like that. So I need to, as I'm coloring this flower in, I need to leave that area white. And it's hard to remember to do that. As you're coming in here shading, it's easy to kind of go, oh no, I didn't want to do that. So what you can do is, just like we did with that cloud edge, is lightly trace in that key shape. And then as you're drawing in the rest of this thing, it's easier for you to leave that as a white shape. So I am now filling in greens in the green part, purples in the purple part, layering in a couple of pencils. You can see there's purple pencils in here, there's some blue pencils, and there's my little key shape up there in the top of the flower, the sepal. If, as I'm coloring this, I'm doing kind of scribble marks every direction, if I've got a very soluble pencil, those can get sort of taken up and I don't have a problem. But if it's not a very soluble pencil and I'm kind of doing this in here, then when I hit that with water, those lines are still going to show up in a way that I don't want them to. So if your pencils are a little bit less soluble, you really want to be careful about, as I'm shading in here, that I'm kind of following the contours of whatever object it is. Different brands of pencils have different degrees of solubility. But sometimes it's a good idea, just in case they show up, is to sort of follow those contours. That if any of those still show through, it'll feel like a little vein on that sepal. So rather in this area, I would make my marks kind of in this direction rather than kind of going. Everybody's flower will look different. And when you're doing this from a flower that is out in the field, everybody will assume that whatever you had on paper, that's the way it looked. My next stage in this is to hit it with water. Do you have a little bit more time with this before you hit it with water? Okay, well, let's just take a little bit more time. We'll put in a little bit more color here. And you want to put in enough color that you'll have, something to work with. You don't need to go as kind of crazy aggro as I was on the black around the sphere. But you want to have some pigment there for you to play with. Layering different pencils on top of each other. Now on your greens, this is a big deal. On the green part of this, it's very easy for the greens to end up looking just very artificial. Kind of a loud, industrial pigment color of green. A lot of the green colored pencils are not really, they're very pure, intense colors. To tone down those colors, if you just mix a light layer of maybe a very pale red-brown into it, a reddish brown, and that will kind of neutralize a bunch of that green. So I've got a few little stripes of red-brown. Just take a pencil and you make a few little marks like that with your red-brown pencil, and then when you're blending that, those will blend in, and that green is not going to be as vivid, vibrant, artificial feeling. Is anybody finding that greens, when you hit them with the water, are turning kind of electric? Some of them, yeah. It's really helpful to have just a little bit of red-brown in those areas.
It works really good.
It just neutralizes that intense green enough, and it still looks natural. I can't really see my brown stripes in here anymore. It's incorporated into that green. It just feels like a more natural shade of green. Too much, and it feels like a red-brown leaf. But it's a good friend to some of the out-of-the-box greens. And now, 2 other steps. The first is, what I want to do is, when this is dry, I am going to come back over it and fix and change some of my values. I need to fix values. So if there's places that are too dark, if there are places that are too light, I can add a little bit more pencil into there. If there are colors that I don't really like, I can add more pencil over the top of that. But the key thing is that I'm not going to re-wet it again. I'm now just using this layer as a smooth backdrop for a colored pencil drawing. And I can use my watercolored pencils just like regular colored pencils. So I'm going to so here it is without a little bit of tweaking. I wanted this to be a little bit more vibrant. I have, here's without it. I'm just using my pencil dry right on top of these to kind of pull out a little bit more value, a little bit more color. Oops. Here's without, here it is with it. Here are the steps. Step one, what did we do first?
Trace outline.
So the outline. Step two,
Lay down colors
step three is water. Step four is color part two. Here I'm thinking about value and the hue. So just tweaking parts of it. And we're almost ready for step 5. For step 5, the last little bit, on top of, you've got this base coat that is then smoothed. You then have tweaked those values. The last little bit, what is it, Amelia? I'm going to add in detail to my drawing. So this, a couple of really important things to notice. This stage here, number 5, the detail comes at the very end. If I did it up here, it would have gotten blurred by the water. And I would have lost all that detail. And it just makes your drawing really, really messy. So this was just blocks of color, no detail. Also notice this, the water comes in the middle of the drawing. So it's not, I do my watercolor pencil drawing and then I add the water to it and I'm done. The water is in the middle of the drawing, and then I'm going to tweak my colors and values and add my detail on top of that. And not add in, anytime you add in water, you're kind of opening that whole can of worms again. Am I going to get a value shift? Am I going to get these unpredictable results? The colored pencil on its own is predictable. And so what you see is what you get. Yep, that's what I want. But it's now on top of this background that is sort of filled in these smooth areas of color. So this last step here, I'm going to add in detail. And this is a dramatic jump in the picture. So let's just kind of go back and say, right, here it is again, without the detail, with the detail. So I am emphasizing some of the lines and edges. You see that through here. You see that through here. Notice though, when I'm reinforcing these lines, I'm not just coming around and drawing a heavy line all over around the entire thing. I'm using a heavier line selectively. So for instance, on this side of this petal right here, this side is a heavy line, this side isn't. Why is it that this edge gets to be heavy? Why am I making this edge heavier?
underneath shape.
It's the edge that is a little bit closer to you. So you see the same thing here, this part that's turned up towards you, that part gets a heavier line than the one that's further back. Other places, just along this edge here, I've got a heavier line here, a little spot there, a heavier line there. So I'm not making a heavy line all the way around the edge, but I'm selectively putting that in. Also, these veins going across this sepal. If I did those at the start, they would have gotten lost with the water. I'm putting those on top of the that little white patch, following kind of the edges of that key. Adding a little bit of yellow up there at the top. Here, heavy edge, there, light edge. generally a heavy bold line will take part of something and pull it into the foreground. And you also get to do fun things like this little guy right here. That's fun to do. Here's without, then you get to go. When you put in this, a drawing that had been kind of confused up in here really starts to crisp up. So when you're in this stage back here, I'm going to back up one more. This is all, it's like what's structure is what structure, all right? You have to be, just sort of know that I'm going to crisp up these edges, I'm going to add detail in, that will come, and then I get my crispy flower. So it's the order of operations of this flower that make a big, big difference here. And think how different this is than if I did all of this and then added water to it. You'd say, I don't like colored pencils. They are watercolor pencils. All your detail would get blurred and lost. It would get muddied. Give you a chance to drop some of those details in on your picture. Also notice I've got more detail on elements that are more in the foreground. As you go back into the picture, less detail. The same is true for that sphere. Remember that sphere, we didn't like it a little while ago, you said, mine's kind of funky. So let's kind of go back into that sphere and into the part of there's part of the red-brown part that you didn't like. You can add some dry pencil over that. And you can also add in other little details. So remember, we were here. Now I want to add some detail on top of this. I can get out some red-brown pencils and some white pencils. And I'm just to add some detail across the face of it. And those patterns, those irregularities in it, now start to become features. So this is adding some white pencil over it. Some white pencils are more opaque than others. You'll have to see with the one that's in your kit just how opaque that is. But this is then detail that's added on top of the blended pencils after they had a chance to dry.
How did you do that?
So I was here. Now what I'm going to do is take some brown pencils and just start to make kind of irregular gas bands across them. Or my red pencil, make myself a little red spot. I'm drawing in on top of that layer that had had all those colors. At the end, I'm getting a white colored pencil and putting in these gas bands. And different brands of white colored pencil will be more or less opaque. On some white pencils, I go in here and I try to make some marks, and there's no change. I'm like, well, that didn't get me anywhere. Then you can just sort of take that pencil and use it as kindling, right? But a good white pencil should be able to kind of give you some light marks on top of a darker surface. Give that a try. But I'm not wetting it. I'm not re-wetting it. This is just like those lines on the iris. I'm now going for detail on top. And I'm keeping that dry and crisp. Some brands of pencils really give you a lot more pigment than others. If you've got a brand of pencil with a lot of binder in it, you'll find yourself really frustrated by its inability to, say, add more.
Yeah.
You just kind of go like this, and you kind of get some just ghosted hint of the line, and you're just embossing your paper. But with a good pencil, it should be able to still be able to kick down some pigment for you. The last little exercise we're going to do is the bird. And I'm not giving you time here to finish all of these, but we want to be able to sort of show you each one of these is going to have slightly different ideas and different techniques. If you want to, post-class, to be able to finish any of these, you're welcome to do that. And also these exercises are all on my blog. As sort of stills that you'll be able to see. So for the little bird, it's a northern parula, and it's this sort of blue-gray and green and white and yellow bird, really stunning little bird. On that iris, we're going to take basically the same approach as the iris, except one kind of key difference. If I'm trying to use, when I'm doing the initial outlining on this bird, there's so many little different colors in different places that if I were trying to okay, this part I'm going to outline in yellow, now I'm going to switch, I'm going to do this one in blue-gray, now, oh no, that was actually supposed to be, no, that's black, I would get lost in the bird. So what I'm going to do is, after I get my basic shape blocked in and I start to draw my bird, I'm going to use a dark brown pencil to draw the whole bird. So, with that little bird there, you can trace it over with a sharp, dark brown pencil. A really dark brown. So you've got a walnut brown. That ends up working a little bit better than if you have a black pencil. The brown is going to blend more smoothly with a lot of other colors. The black, if you have it there and it gets wet, is going to cause you a little bit more grief. It can be more harsh. And a number of pencils that are black, when they get wet, if they're near yellow, they'll sort of turn things a little bit greenish. So I really recommend kind of doing that with a very dark brown, sharp pencil. But in the field, you're not drawing this and then tracing it over. The only reason we're kind of tracing over this drawing on your worksheet is that this isn't a class on how you build and draw the bird and the wing. It's just, again, about how we're coloring those areas. There are other workshops where we'll be drawing the whole bird from scratch. So we will get there. This is a little bit like that kind of how to draw an owl thing. Like, just start with this, but it's in brown pencil. We will have that in other workshops. For now, just we'll trace over those lines with our dark brown. Once you've got your bird blocked in, the next step is to add what artists call the local color. That is, like if you're looking at a red house, it's red. Here I'm not worried about what part is in shadow, what part is in shade. I'm just going to be putting in, if it's got a blue-gray head and back, inside, I'm going to put blue-gray in there. If it's got a green back, I'm going to put green there, yellow there, yellow there. So it's a very kind of paint by numbers effect here. I've got a green triangle back here, an olivey green. I've got, which again you get by adding green, combining that with a little bit of red-brown. Blue-gray, I've got a yellow breast. So I'm not having to worry about what parts of this are in shade or where the shadows go. I'm putting in those colors. An interesting thing about this is that if I were doing this with watercolor, I'd probably put in my shadow first and then put the local color on top of that. But I'm going the opposite direction with these pencils. I'm first putting in my my local color. I'll be dropping in the shadows in the step where I'm adjusting my values. The next step is to add water to this. I want to get each of these to be a smooth area of feathers. And the watercolor pencils allow me to do that really effectively. So here's without water. Notice how much it darkens up and kind of becomes more clear. Here is pre-water, then you hit it with that water. Nice little kind of clear zones. Still, there's no shadows on it, but we'll handle that after this. So I'm going to blend this in there. Keep that yellow nice and crisp and clean. Nice clean brush for where you're in your yellow. As your once your water is dry, remember we're doing the what is the next stage? Yeah, we're gonna tweak the color. Like if we got some areas too pale, or we like I didn't expect it to be that color, or we want areas to be darker, we're gonna adjust our values in colors. Now with dry pencil on top of that whole thing. For this, I'm gonna get a purple gray pencil. I'm gonna put a little bit of shadow in on the side of its head here. I'm also going to put a little bit of light purple gray shadow, very, very faint, in this area here, kind of along the belly, a little bit down in here. What I'm doing with that is imagining that this is the lights on the back here, this area here is in shadow. I'm going to leave a little edge of unshadowed zone right on the outward edge of the body, right in here. So if your shadow goes all the way to the body edge, your picture will look actually a lot more flat than if you leave a little bit of room for what artists call the reflected light. So I'm going to leave room for that in, right in under there, like this. So just a little, that's a purple gray. You can see on the side of the head here, same thing, going into there, adding some shadow on the legs and on the branch. I'm going to enlarge this branch. If my branch is going like this, if the light is coming from back here, the top edge of that is going to be more in shadow. So I can leave a little bit of reflected light along the bottom edge, a big highlight along the top edge. That will help your branch look rounded instead of flat. I am not adding water to this shadow. If I do, we'd get that darkening effect. And also, because there's some purple in it, it would really brighten. And all of a sudden I would have a big, bright purple crescent on the belly of my bird. So by leaving that just with the pencil, you get this more sort of subtle blue-gray shadow effect going on in here. It's not going to get over blended. It's not going to get too messy. These step-by-steps, by the way, are already posted, or posted them on my blog last night. So you can pull up each of these as a still and be able to take as much time as you want kind of looking at it or copying it. The worksheet you're working on right now is also available on the same page as a download. It's a free download. So you can download that if you want to kind of rework this as an experiment again. It's really helpful to do experiments on somebody else's drawing, because then you can just concentrate, like, don't worry about, like, I don't want to mess up my drawing of the bird. There's no investment in that. And you're able just to play with the material. How do these watercolor pencils work? without having to worry about messing up your egret. My last step here, remember when we had the add in the details? I'm going to add in some detail and some intense black. So I'm going to use my black pencil, and this next step really completes the bird. Pull out the black pencil,
Wow.
bam!
Wow.
Right? So these crisp, this is all sort of soft, and then you get that next to the crisp, hard lines, and you've got those smooth things working for you. You also have these crisp, deliberate details that you put in. I want to show you a trick that I'm doing on the wing here. These wing feathers right in here are overlapping with the one that is on the top, this one is on top of this one is on top of this one. Then there's a big pile of feathers that have a very pale outer edge. And that gives you this sort of zebra striping in here on the side. In this row of feathers here, I've got one that's on top and the others are down below that. So what I'm going to do is, let's take that, first this 1, 2, 3 and all these ones in here. Here are my feathers, and then there's this block here of these ones, and then the wingtip sticking out there. What I'm going to do is, in putting in the black with my pencil, I'm going to start that up here and just bring the black down, but not all the way to the edge of that first feather. So you start with the one that's on the top, then you jump to the one that is right down below that, and I'm going to do the same thing. And I get a dark feather with a pale edge. Same thing right here. So you think that you're drawing in those edges, but no, what you're doing is you are drawing in the dark, and you're leaving that pale edge. Then for these ones here, I just have I'm drawing in these lines, continuing into the primary feathers here, and then the top edge of that is covered up by the primary coverts here. The back part of this is all dark. So I have this little zone in here where I'm seeing those edges of those feathers. You get the sense of all this detail, but really what I did is I did these 1, 2, 3, then a whole bunch of parallel lines, covered up the tip with black and that end with black. Here's a neat little eye trick. On my eye, I want it to look wet. So what I can do is with my black pencil, draw a little circle, and then I'm going to color everything outside of that circle. The circle kind of gives me a little boundary edge that I can kind of bonk that into. So you could stop that drawing there. If you want to, you can also add in a background. Sometimes a little background does a lot to really kind of put a bird in a place. This feels like it's floating in the middle of a big white page. I could do something as simple as, before that, put in one other thing. These birds actually have a little bit of rust on their throat and their sides here, so I could drop in a little bit final detail before my background. Forgot about that. And on these, imagine this breast is a bunch of feathers that are overlapping like that, right? So what you can do is think of kind of a scalloping of some of these little kind of red, brown things. So there's little red, brown scallops like that. And what I'm doing, so my pencil marks are kind of like that to make these little red-brown scallops through here.
This is a northern what?
A northern parula. It's a cool warbler.
P-A-R?
Parula. I think. But again, you're asking a dyslexic about spelling here.
It's a word.
It's a warbler, the parula. They are an East Coast United States bird. So now I can talk about background. A background can be as simple as this. Right? So here's just it's a big rectangle behind the thing, a little bit more orange down in this end. That kind of, this bird now has just a little place to hang out. Sometimes if you get really fancy and overwork a background, it really detracts from the picture. So sometimes just a little bit of color will pop your bird. That also then gets you this contrast, right? You get, there's yellows and oranges in this, there's yellows and oranges in this. It kind of pulls that out, just like the matting in a frame might. You might think like, what kind of colors do I want to pull out? Also having this up against that belly pops that belly. So because I've got light against dark there, then that belly pulls off. I very often like to have my backgrounds in a little shape that the bird is in front of, rather than have, so if I've got a bird shape, here, we're seeing that here with this rectangle, so here, sometimes here's a bird, you can do all sorts of different things. You could just, you could put in a circle, and part of the bird can be in or out of that circle. You could have, here I've got a rectangle on part of that bird. So having the bird overlap that background means, well, one, you don't have to draw as much background. But it also kind of clearly says that this is in a plane that's in front of that. So it just suggests a little bit of space there. I like this effect here. When I was drawing this picture, I made the mistake of like, ooh, a little bit is good, so a lot more will be better. And I didn't know when to quit. So what I'm going to do is just sort of show you kind of an example of kind of overworking something, and just like I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. But sometimes it's better just to kind of stop before you think you're done. So this background is about to get overworked. Like this is nice, kind of clear, simple. Now it just got busy, right? And I thought like, I don't really like that. So what did I do? I did more, right? Like, oh, I still don't like that. So what did I do? I added water to it, right? And like, yeah, I still don't like it. So fortunately, I had scanned these, and I really like that. So just sort of a thought that sometimes less is more. A little background can really help pop something. But if it gets too fussy itself, it starts competing with your attention for the bird, right? And that is, it's nice. Oh, one other thing that I should point out that I can do. I forgot that I did this. If you look right here on the back of the bird in this zone that I'm putting a little rectangle around, that is slightly paler than the bird here. That's because I took a white pencil and I went and I just put a little bit of white back there. It just gave you a hint that there's a little bit of light reflecting on the top edge of this bird, further kind of rounding it. And something that's done on dry paper. So I'll stop here pretending that I didn't then go and overwork it. The keys to using watercolor pencils. Number one, the water happens in the middle. And after you've done the water, that just gives you these areas of smooth stuff. You can then fix your colors, fix your values, and add detail onto it. If your paint gets globbed in one place, then you can blend that out. And also just be aware that a bunch of these colors, they will surprise you. And so know your colored pencil set. Some of your colors are going to work just the way you expect them to. But once you do that little experiment with those strips, you'll find like, ooh, that's a darkener, that's a lighting, that one lightens when I add water to it. And this one here has a huge color shift. So if you know those things, then they don't come and surprise you. And watercolor pencils are going to work really well for you. If you like this medium, play with it. Do whatever you want with it. But don't feel that you're supposed to do this and all these different other mediums. So some people think like, I've got to do this and I've got to learn how to do regular colored pencils and how to do watercolor and, no. Whatever, finding a color medium that works for you and that you really enjoy doing is great. But don't feel that you're supposed to do this. If this has some real advantages to it, and if you like it, go with that. If you like watercolor, go with that. But don't feel pressure that you're supposed to do this and this and this and this and this and this. It should be a lot of fun, and it is. It's just another tool to kind of help you get some color on the page, because color is beautiful. Last little thing, I'm going to give you all a homework assignment. You've got a few new ideas about how to use these colored pencils. My homework assignment for you is just to give me 3 watercolor pencil drawings. Do 3 watercolor pencils, 3 more watercolor pencil drawings, and just keep sort of messing around, sort of see what it does. And we don't want these to be kind of high pressure, you've drawn the thing in the field and you're worried about messing it up. These are 3 experiments. And so this could be copying a picture from a book, or just a little study where you're sitting down. Don't kind of put high pressure on yourself. Use this as just 3 experiments to sort of see how this stuff behaves. And notice what parts of your page are really working for you, and notice which parts aren't, and do more of the part that is working and less of the part that isn't. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful.
Thank you.